Johnny Guitar didn't play by the rules. It flipped the Western on its head, turned cowboys into backdrop players, and let two women wage war with words sharper than bullets. But behind the Technicolor dust, chaos ruled. The star hated her co-star so much she had her fired mid-shoot. The director was caught between genius and collapse, and the film that bombed in America became a masterpiece in France. These are 20 weird facts about Johnny Guitar. And the bonus? A dress so tight Joan Crawford couldn't sit down in it, so she just didn't. Strap in. This ain't your typical shootout. Joan Crawford didn't just star in Johnny Guitar, she controlled it. By 1954, Crawford was no longer Hollywood's golden girl, but she still had power, leverage, and a production deal that gave her final say on nearly everything. She handpicked director Nicholas Ray, approved the script, chose the costumes, and even had input on casting. Republic Pictures thought they were getting a standard Western with a big name attached. What they got was Crawford's fever dream, a film where men took orders and women held guns. She saw Vienna, the saloon owner at the center of the story, as her comeback vehicle, a role that would prove she could carry a film without playing the victim or the vamp. But control came with a price. Crawford micromanaged every detail, clashing with the crew, rewriting scenes on the fly, and demanding endless takes until her vision matched what was on screen. The studio wanted a simple cowboy picture. Crawford wanted a psychological war zone dressed in boots and spurs. And she got it because when Joan Crawford wanted something in 1954, she didn't ask, she took. Number 2. Nicholas Ray wasn't chosen for his experience with Westerns. He was chosen because he was broken. By the time Johnny Guitar came around, Ray was spiraling. His marriage was collapsing, his drinking was out of control, and his last few films had underperformed. Joan Crawford saw him as malleable, someone she could shape, someone who wouldn't challenge her authority on set. But Ray wasn't weak. He was desperate, and desperate directors make dangerous choices. He poured his unraveling personal life into the film, turning what should have been a straightforward genre piece into something raw, violent, and strangely intimate. The tension between Vienna and Emma Small, the film's two female leads, mirrored the power struggle happening behind the camera. Ray later admitted he lost control of the production halfway through. Crawford essentially directed herself in many scenes, repositioning cameras, adjusting lighting, telling actors where to stand. Ray didn't fight it. He just watched and let the madness bleed into every frame. The result was a film that felt unstable, unhinged, and utterly unforgettable. Number 3. Sterling Hayden hated everything about Johnny Guitar. He didn't want the role, he didn't understand the script, and he couldn't stand Joan Crawford. Hayden was a reluctant actor to begin with, a man who'd rather be sailing than standing under studio lights, and this film tested every ounce of his patience. He later called it the worst experience of his career, worse than testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee, worse than his failed first marriage. Crawford demanded take after take, obsessing over tiny details, her makeup, her angles, the way the light hit her face. Hayden just wanted to say his lines and leave, but Crawford wouldn't let him. She'd stop mid-scene if his positioning blocked her key light. She'd request reshoots if his performance felt too strong, too commanding. Because Johnny Guitar, despite the title, wasn't about Johnny. It was about Vienna. And Hayden, a naturally magnetic presence, had to be dimmed, softened, turned into a supporting player in a movie named after his character. He resented it. He resented her. And that tension, that simmering dislike, it's visible in every scene they share. The distance between them wasn't acting, it was survival. Number 4. Mercedes McCambridge walked onto the set of Johnny Guitar, thinking she was joining a professional production. She left it traumatized. McCambridge played Emma Small, Vienna's rival, a rancher driven by jealousy, rage, and something darker that the film never quite names. On paper, it was a juicy role, a villain with depth, complexity, fire. But from day one, Joan Crawford saw McCambridge as a threat. McCambridge was younger, recently Oscar-nominated and critically adored. Worse, she was good, really good, and the camera loved her just as much as it loved Crawford. That was unacceptable. Crawford started small, subtle cruelties. She'd rearrange shooting schedules, so McCambridge's scenes were filmed late in the day when everyone was exhausted. She'd request that McCambridge's costumes be altered to look less flattering. She had her makeup artist told to use unflattering tones. But it escalated. Crawford began refusing to be on set during McCambridge's close-ups, forcing her to deliver intense emotional scenes to an empty mark. Then came the final blow. Midway through production, Crawford allegedly went to the studio and demanded changes to the script, changes that reduced McCambridge's screen time and softened her character's power. McCambridge fought back, but she was outranked, outmaneuvered, and eventually emotionally destroyed. She later said working with Joan Crawford was like being slowly poisoned. The costumes in Johnny Guitar weren't chosen for historical accuracy. They were chosen for war. Joan Crawford wanted to look like a monarch in exile, so she hired designer Sheila O'Brien to create outfits that screamed power, wealth, and control, even in a dusty frontier saloon. The result was a series of bold, almost absurd costumes that had nothing to do with 1880s Arizona and everything to do with 1950s high fashion. Crawford's black shirt and pants combo in the opening scene was sleek, modern, nearly masculine, a direct challenge to traditional Western femininity. Meanwhile, Mercedes McCambridge's Emma Small wore harsh, conservative dresses in dark tones, costumes designed to make her look severe, repressed, dangerous. The contrast was intentional. Crawford wanted the audience to see two women locked in a visual battle, their clothes as much weapons as the guns they carried. But the most famous costume, the one that nearly broke Crawford, was a white dress so tight she couldn't sit, couldn't bend, could barely breathe. She wore it anyway, standing through every take because image mattered more than comfort. The dress became iconic, and Crawford spent the entire shoot in pain. Johnny Guitar was filmed in Technicolor, but it didn't look like any other color western of the era. Most westerns used muted, earthy tones to evoke realism, dusty browns, faded blues, sun-bleached yellows. Not this one. Nicholas Ray and cinematographer Harry Stradling Sr. pushed the color to the edge of surrealism. Reds burned like fire. Greens glowed unnaturally. Shadows fell in deep, inky blacks that swallowed entire sections of the frame. The saloon interiors looked less like a real building and more like a stage set for Greek tragedy, overlit, oversaturated, almost hostile. Critics at the time called it garish, ugly, a mistake, but Ray knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted the film to feel unreal, artificial, like a nightmare dressed as a western. The exaggerated colors mirrored the heightened emotions, the melodrama, the violence simmering beneath every line of dialogue. It wasn't supposed to look like Monument Valley or Ford's vision of the West. It was supposed to look like the inside of someone's head, and it did. European filmmakers, especially the French New Wave directors, saw it immediately. They called it expressionist, groundbreaking, proof that Westerns could be art. American audiences just thought it looked weird. The script for Johnny Guitar was written by Philip Yordan, but the film that ended up on screen barely resembled what he'd put on the page. Yordan adapted it from a novel by Roy Chancellor, a pulpy Western with standard genre beats, but even his screenplay was relatively conventional. Then Joan Crawford got her hands on it. She started rewriting scenes, adding dialogue, sharpening Vienna's edges, making her colder, meaner, more untouchable. Nicholas Ray rewrote it again, layering in his own obsessions, his failing marriage, his fear of obsolescence, his strange fascination with women who refused to be saved. By the time shooting started, there were at least 3 versions of the script floating around, and no one was working from the same draft. Actors would show up to set and find new pages waiting for them, dialogue they'd never seen, scenes restructured overnight. Sterling Hayden stopped trying to memorize his lines, he just read them off cue cards. Mercedes McCambridge later said she never fully understood her character because the character kept changing. The chaos should have destroyed the film. Instead, it gave Johnny Guitar a strange, unpredictable energy, a sense that anything could happen, because on set, it did. There's a scene late in Johnny Guitar where Emma Small confronts Vienna in the saloon, and the two women face off in a showdown more tense than any gunfight in the film. It's electric, venomous, and deeply uncomfortable to watch, and none of it was acting. By that point in the shoot, Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge despised each other so completely that Nicholas Ray stopped trying to mediate. He just let the camera roll and captured the real hatred between them. McCambridge later described Crawford as cruel, calculating, and obsessed with dominance. Crawford, in turn, said McCambridge was unprofessional and bitter. The truth was probably somewhere in between, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that the animosity was real, and it bled into every frame they shared. In that final confrontation, when Emma screams at Vienna, when her face contorts with rage, that's not a performance. That's Mercedes McCambridge staring down the woman who'd been sabotaging her for weeks. And when Vienna smirks back, cold and untouchable, that's Joan Crawford reminding her rival who won. The scene became legendary not because it was well written or well directed, but because it was true. Johnny Guitar bombed in America. Republic Pictures released it with minimal fanfare, a mid-budget Western with a fading star and a director nobody trusted. Critics savaged it. The New York Times called it absurd. Variety said it was overblown and ridiculous. Audiences stayed away. It made back its budget, barely, and then disappeared from theaters within weeks, dismissed as a curiosity, a misfire, proof that Joan Crawford's career was over. But in France, something different happened. In 1954, a group of young film critics at Cahiers du Cinéma saw Johnny Guitar and lost their minds. François Truffaut called it a work of genius. Jean-Luc Godard said it was one of the most beautiful films ever made. They saw what American critics missed: the color, the madness, the way the film dismantled genre conventions and rebuilt them into something raw and modern. To them, Nicholas Ray wasn't a hack, he was an auteur, and Johnny Guitar wasn't a failed Western. It was a masterpiece. Over the years, that French enthusiasm spread. The film was rediscovered, reevaluated, elevated to cult status, and eventually recognized as one of the most radical Westerns ever made. It took decades, but Johnny Guitar won, just not in the country that made it. Ward Bond, a John Wayne regular and one of Hollywood's most prominent conservative voices, showed up in Johnny Guitar with a chip on his shoulder. He played John McIvers, a marshal caught between two warring women, but Bond didn't care about the role. He cared about politics. By 1954, Bond was a vocal member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, a group dedicated to rooting out suspected communists in Hollywood. And Nicholas Ray, the director of Johnny Guitar, had been quietly named in HUAC hearings. Bond knew it. Ray knew he knew it. The set became a minefield. Bond would make snide comments between takes, little jabs about loyalty, patriotism, the importance of naming names. Ray ignored him. Joan Crawford, no fan of Bond's politics or his ego, made sure his screen time stayed limited. She'd already cut one actor she didn't like. She could cut him too. Bond backed off, but the tension never left. He finished his scenes and left without saying goodbye to anyone. Years later, he'd trash the film in interviews, calling it the worst Western he'd ever been in. But the truth was simpler. He just couldn't stand being in a movie where a woman called the shots. Number 11. The famous opening scene, where Johnny rides into town and Vienna stands waiting in her saloon, wasn't shot first. It was shot last. By the time they got to it, the entire cast and crew were exhausted, burned out from weeks of Crawford's demands and Ray's drinking. The scene required chemistry, longing, a sense of shared history between two people who'd loved and lost each other. But Sterling Hayden and Joan Crawford could barely look at each other by that point. They ran through it mechanically, hitting marks, saying lines, nothing more. Nicholas Ray watched the playback and knew it was dead on arrival, so he tried something desperate. He cleared the set, sent everyone home except the two leads and a skeleton crew. Then he got Hayden drunk. Not tipsy, drunk. And he told Crawford to stop acting, to just stand there and let Hayden do whatever felt real. They shot it again. One take, no rehearsal. Hayden stumbled through his lines, his voice rough, his eyes barely focused. Crawford stayed still, cold, watching him like a predator watches prey. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. The distance between them, the lack of warmth, it made the scene feel tragic, like two people who destroyed each other and couldn't find their way back. Ray kept that take, and it became one of the most haunting openings in Western history. Number 12. There's a guitar in Johnny Guitar, but Johnny barely plays it. The instrument shows up in exactly 3 scenes, always handled awkwardly, always feeling like an afterthought. That's because it was. The original script had Johnny as a gunslinger who'd given up violence for music, a reformed killer trying to live quietly. It was supposed to be central to his character, a symbol of his transformation. But Sterling Hayden couldn't play guitar at all. He tried. The studio hired an instructor, gave him weeks of lessons, but Hayden's fingers were too big, too clumsy, and he had zero interest in learning. So they brought in a hand double for close-ups, hired a musician to play the actual music, and restructured the script to minimize the guitar's presence. What was supposed to be Johnny's defining trait became a prop he occasionally held and rarely used, critics noticed. They mocked the title, asking why the film was named after a guitar that barely appeared. But in a weird way, it fit, because Johnny Guitar was never really about Johnny, it was about Vienna. And the fact that the title promised something the film didn't deliver, that was just one more way it refused to play by the rules. Number 13. Republic Pictures was a B-movie studio, the kind of place that cranked out cheap westerns and serials for Saturday matinees. They didn't make prestige pictures. They didn't compete with MGM or Warner Brothers. They made product, fast and cheap. So when Joan Crawford signed with them, Hollywood was shocked. She'd been a star at MGM for over a decade, one of the biggest names in the industry. What was she doing at Republic? The answer was simple: no one else wanted her. By the early 1950s, Crawford's box office draw had faded. Her last few films had flopped. Major studios saw her as a risk, a has-been, someone whose best years were behind her. Republic offered her something the big studios wouldn't: control. They gave her producer credit, script approval, casting power, everything she needed to make the film she wanted. In exchange, they got her name on the poster. It was a gamble for both sides. Republic hoped Crawford's star power would elevate their reputation. Crawford hoped a bold, unconventional Western would remind Hollywood she could still lead a picture. Neither got what they wanted. The film bombed, Republic stayed a B studio, and Crawford's career continued its slow decline. But she got to make the movie on her terms. And sometimes, that's all that matters. Number 14. The town in Johnny Guitar doesn't feel real because it wasn't. Most westerns shot on location, using real deserts, real mountains, real sky to ground the story in something tangible. But Johnny Guitar was filmed almost entirely on Republic's backlot in Studio City, California. The saloon, the town, the landscapes, all built from scratch, all artificial. Nicholas Ray wanted it that way. He didn't want realism. He wanted a western that felt like it existed outside time and space, a myth, a dream, something that could only happen in the movies. So the rocks looked painted, the sky looked too blue, the dust looked like it came from a wind machine, because it did. The sets had a theatrical quality, like everyone was performing on a stage rather than living in a world. Some critics called it cheap, lazy, proof that Republic couldn't afford a real location shoot. But Ray wasn't trying to hide the artifice. He was embracing it. He wanted the audience to know they were watching a construct, a story being told, not a documentary. It was a bold choice, a risky choice, and it made Johnny Guitar feel unlike any other Western of its era. Not better, not worse, just completely, utterly different. Number 15. Peggy Lee's title song, Johnny Guitar, became a hit in Europe, but Joan Crawford hated it. She thought it was too romantic, too soft, too sentimental for the film she'd made. Crawford wanted something harder, darker, a ballad that felt more like a warning than a love song, but the studio overruled her. They wanted a commercial single, something that could play on the radio and drive ticket sales. So Peggy Lee recorded it, her voice smooth and aching, singing about a man who'd left and a woman still waiting. It was beautiful. It was haunting. And it had almost nothing to do with the film. The song played over the opening credits, setting a tone of longing and heartbreak that the actual movie never delivered. Because Vienna wasn't waiting for Johnny. She'd moved on, built an empire, and barely blinked when he showed up again. The disconnect was jarring. Audiences expected a romance. They got a war. The song became a standard, covered by dozens of artists, remembered long after most people forgot the film existed. Crawford never forgave it. She said it lied about who Vienna was, and maybe she was right, but the lie was prettier than the truth, and in Hollywood, that's usually enough. Number 16. There's a scene where Vienna walks through her burning saloon, flames all around her, smoke choking the air, and she doesn't run. She doesn't panic. She just walks, calm, cold, untouchable. It's one of the most striking images in the film, a woman standing in the middle of destruction like she owns it, and Joan Crawford almost died filming it. The fire wasn't fake. Republic Studios used real flames, real smoke, real heat to make the scene look authentic. They built the set to burn, rigged it with accelerants, and told Crawford to walk through it while it collapsed around her. She refused a double. She insisted on doing it herself because she wanted the close-ups, wanted the audience to see her face in the firelight. But halfway through the take, something went wrong. A beam collapsed early, sparks flew, and for a few seconds, Crawford was trapped, surrounded by fire with no clear exit. The crew rushed in, pulled her out, and she walked away with minor burns on her arms and smoke in her lungs. Nicholas Ray wanted to stop, reschedule, give her time to recover. Crawford refused. She had them reset, relight the fire, and shot the scene again, because image was everything. And if Vienna was going to burn, she was going to do it beautifully. Number 17. The final showdown in Johnny Guitar isn't between Johnny and the bad guys. It's between Vienna and Emma, two women with guns, facing off in a cave while the men stand back and watch. In 1954, that was unheard of. Westerns didn't end with women shooting each other. Women were supposed to be the prize, the motivation, the thing men fought over. But in Johnny Guitar, men were irrelevant. The real fight was always between Vienna and Emma, two sides of the same coin. One free and the other caged, both refusing to back down. Nicholas Ray later said he wanted to make a Western where masculinity was a myth, where the tough guy with the gun was just a prop, where real power belonged to the women who refused to play the game. He succeeded. Johnny spends the entire climax standing in the background, useless, watching as Vienna and Emma destroy each other. The scene shocked audiences. Some walked out. Others laughed, thinking it was absurd. But a few, especially women, saw something radical, a Western that finally told the truth. That the real violence, the real danger wasn't in the gunfights. It was in the war between women who'd been taught they couldn't both survive. Number 18. Ernest Borgnine shows up in Johnny Guitar as Bart Lonergan, a brutish, sneering henchman who works for Emma Small. It was one of his earliest roles. Filmed a year before he'd win an Oscar for Marty and prove he could be more than just a heavy. But on the set of Johnny Guitar, no one saw potential. They just saw a character actor doing a job. Borgnine later said he had no idea what the film was about while they were shooting it. The script changed daily. Joan Crawford barely acknowledged him. Nicholas Ray seemed distracted, distant, more interested in the women's scenes than anything involving the male cast. Borgnine just showed up, said his lines, collected his paycheck, and left. He didn't think about Johnny Guitar again until years later, when French critics started calling it a masterpiece. He watched it again, older and wiser, and finally understood what Ray had been trying to do. Strip away the myth of the Western hero, expose the rot underneath, let the women carry the violence. Borgnine admitted he wished he'd paid more attention at the time, wished he'd understood he was part of something strange and important. But maybe it was better that he didn't, because Johnny Guitar worked best when no one knew what it was. Number 19. Nicholas Ray's marriage to actress Gloria Graham collapsed during the making of Johnny Guitar, and he poured all of that pain into the film. The bitterness between Vienna and Emma, the way they circle each other with words sharper than knives, the sense that love has curdled into something poisonous, that was Ray working through his own heartbreak on screen. Graham had left him for his teenage son from a previous marriage, a betrayal so twisted, so painful, that Ray couldn't process it any other way except through his work. He saw Vienna as himself, scarred, hardened, unable to trust. He saw Emma as the rage he felt, the jealousy, the need to burn everything down. rather than let someone else have it. Joan Crawford understood. She was going through her own romantic disasters, her own battles with aging and obsolescence. She and Ray didn't talk about it, didn't need to. They just channeled it into Vienna, making her colder, meaner, more damaged than the script required. The result was a character unlike any woman in Westerns before or since, someone who didn't want to be saved, didn't want to be loved, just wanted to be left alone, to rule her kingdom in peace. Ray's marriage was over, but the ghost of it lived in every frame of Johnny Guitar. Number 20. After Johnny Guitar rapped, Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge never spoke again. Not at industry events, not at award shows, not even decades later when both their careers had long since ended. The hatred was permanent, absolute, a wound that never healed. McCambridge went on to a successful career in radio, television, and theater. She won awards, earned respect, built a life beyond Hollywood's cruelties. But she never forgot what Joan Crawford did to her on that set. In interviews late in her life, she'd bring it up unprompted, still angry, still hurt, still trying to make sense of why Crawford had been so vicious. Crawford, for her part, rarely mentioned McCambridge at all. When pressed, she'd say only that the actress had been difficult, unprofessional, someone who couldn't handle the pressure. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But Crawford was a movie star, and movie stars rewrote history to suit their needs. The truth was simpler and sadder. Two talented women had been pitted against each other in a system that told them only one could win. And even though the film was over, even though the war had ended, neither of them could stop fighting. Because in Hollywood, some battles never finish. They just fade to black.